There is a certain kind of woman who learned very early how to take up less emotional space around other people. Not invisible, just careful. Careful with her reactions, careful with her needs, careful not to emotionally inconvenience already stressed adults around her. Women born between 1973 and 1980 grew up during a strange emotional transition period in American family life and modern independence. You were raised between old emotional expectations and modern pressure, between emotional distance and increasing childhood independence during those years. Many of you came home after school to quiet houses where television became emotional background comfort during long, empty afternoons alone. Music became emotional processing, while bedrooms slowly became private emotional worlds where your feelings could safely exist without interruption from others. Without fully realizing it, many younger Gen X women slowly became emotionally self-managed children who learned survival through quiet emotional adaptation instead. You learned how to handle disappointment quietly, soothe yourself quietly, and continue functioning quietly without needing too much emotional reassurance from anyone. People praised you for being mature. But sometimes maturity simply appears when emotional support feels inconsistent for far too many years inside childhood. Many women from this generation became observant before becoming emotionally expressive, watching moods, tension, silence, and emotional shifts very carefully around adults. You learned which emotions created stress inside the house, and which emotions quietly kept difficult emotional situations calm and manageable for everyone. After enough years, emotional adjustment stopped feeling temporary and slowly transformed into personality, behavior, emotional caution, and everyday survival itself for many women. Even now, many younger Gen X women still instinctively minimize themselves emotionally, apologizing quickly and downplaying emotional exhaustion almost automatically during conversations. Some part of your nervous system still believes emotional needs should remain small, manageable, quiet, controlled, and emotionally convenient for everyone else nearby. That adaptation helped you survive emotionally, but it also created a quiet loneliness many younger Gen X women still carry silently today. It was not dramatic loneliness. It was the quiet loneliness of remaining emotionally unseen while still appearing dependable and emotionally functional outside. You still worked, answered messages, handled responsibilities, and continued daily life normally while something inside you remained emotionally exhausted and overwhelmed quietly. Because you became so capable emotionally, most people never fully noticed how much invisible emotional energy survival actually required from you every single day. That may be one of the defining psychological traits carried quietly by many younger Gen X women throughout most of their emotionally exhausting adult lives. You learned how to continue functioning gracefully even while emotionally depleted, and eventually people began mistaking endurance for inner peace instead of adaptation. What many younger Gen X women carried throughout adulthood was not simple independence. It was emotional self-management developed quietly over many difficult years instead. There is a difference between choosing independence freely and learning very early that depending emotionally on other people never fully felt emotionally safe. Women born between 1973 and 1980 often became emotionally careful long before they ever became emotionally secure, relaxed, or fully trusting inside relationships. You learned how to stay composed, recover privately, and continue functioning normally without needing too much reassurance from anyone emotionally around you ever again. Eventually, people began associating you with strength, while hidden beneath that strength was often emotional loneliness that remained almost completely invisible to others. Because emotionally self-managed women rarely receive comfort automatically, other people usually assume you are completely fine simply because you appear emotionally composed outside. That invisible emotional wound quietly follows many younger Gen X women into adulthood, where emotional dependability often feels painfully rare in return from others. Many women from this generation also became deeply uncomfortable with appearing emotionally needy, reactive, sensitive, difficult, or emotionally overwhelming to other people around them. So you shortened your reactions, softened your needs, and filtered difficult feelings carefully before expressing them outwardly to anyone else around you ever. You became emotionally controlled before becoming emotionally safe, and over time emotional control slowly transformed into identity and everyday survival for many women. A lot of younger Gen X women are now realizing how emotionally exhausting that carefully controlled identity actually became over many difficult adult years. You became the calm one automatically, the understanding one automatically, and the emotionally responsible one automatically inside almost every difficult relationship around you. Even while privately overwhelmed yourself, many women from this generation continued carrying emotional responsibilities quietly without asking anyone else nearby for meaningful support. Many women born between 1973 and 1980 also learned to associate usefulness with emotional worth, acceptance, stability, and emotional belonging throughout adulthood. You helped people instinctively, listened instinctively, carried emotional labor instinctively, because usefulness slowly became connected to emotional acceptance and survival itself internally. That emotional conditioning quietly follows people for decades, especially women who learned survival through emotional adaptation instead of emotional safety during childhood years. A lot of younger Gen X women secretly feel emotionally tired of always being responsible for stabilizing situations and managing everyone else carefully around them. Many women from this generation became tired of over-functioning emotionally inside relationships while privately feeling emotionally misunderstood and psychologically unsupported by others nearby. But expressing emotional exhaustion still feels uncomfortable because your nervous system became deeply attached to reliability, composure, and emotional self-control throughout adulthood instead. You became the woman who handled difficult things well, and eventually instability itself began feeling dangerous to your emotional sense of identity internally. So many younger Gen X women continued functioning automatically, even while their bodies quietly asked them emotionally and physically to finally slow down completely. That is why many women born between 1973 and 1980 struggle recognizing burnout early, because survival mode slowly became emotionally familiar over many years. Some younger Gen X women also became emotionally private over time, because they stopped expecting most people to fully understand their complicated interior worlds anymore. So many women quietly learned how to carry themselves emotionally instead, becoming private not because they lacked depth, but because depth rarely felt safe. That may be one of the clearest emotional patterns carried quietly by younger Gen X women throughout their complicated, emotionally exhausting adult lives today. The psychology of younger Gen X women cannot be understood properly without understanding what emotional adaptation quietly does to the nervous system over time. Eventually, the body learns survival patterns so deeply that those emotional survival responses stop feeling temporary and slowly begin feeling like personality instead. Women born between 1973 and 1980 were often raised during years where emotional independence received far more praise than emotional openness or vulnerability. A quiet child was considered emotionally easy, a self-sufficient child was considered emotionally mature, and privately disappointed children were considered emotionally strong instead. But children were never supposed to emotionally raise themselves quietly, and many younger Gen X women slowly learned exactly how to do that anyway. Enough for the nervous system to absorb one important emotional lesson very early. Do not rely heavily upon emotional consistency from people around you. That emotional lesson quietly shapes adulthood in ways many people never fully recognize, especially inside romantic relationships and emotionally vulnerable personal connections later. A lot of younger Gen X women developed attachment patterns built around emotional caution, because closeness itself quietly created anxiety inside their nervous systems. You wanted emotional closeness deeply, but emotional closeness also created quiet anxiety internally, because depending upon people always felt emotionally risky and uncertain. So many women from this generation became hyper-independent emotionally before they ever truly wanted independence for themselves emotionally or psychologically inside adulthood at all. You learned how to comfort yourself, distract yourself, recover yourself, because emotional self-reliance slowly became psychologically necessary for survival during difficult years emotionally. While those emotional skills helped many younger Gen X women survive psychologically, those same emotional patterns later created distance from vulnerability and emotional trust. Some younger Gen X women even feel physically uncomfortable whenever someone consistently shows up emotionally for them, with dependable warmth and emotional stability repeatedly. Not because kindness feels emotionally bad, but because emotional consistency itself still feels unfamiliar to nervous systems, shaped by unpredictable emotional environments earlier. Your nervous system spent many years preparing emotionally for sudden emotional shifts, so stability itself can still feel cautiously unfamiliar even today sometimes. A lot of younger Gen X women also developed a quiet low-grade hypervigilance, scanning emotional atmospheres around them automatically without consciously realizing they are doing it. You notice everyone's emotional tone, body language, mood shift, tension level, and emotional reaction automatically before you even consciously think about it. That pattern began very early during childhood, monitoring household tension in order to predict emotional safety before predictable emotional support actually existed inside relationships. Many younger Gen X women still emotionally read rooms instantly upon entering them, an exhausting psychological habit that often quietly continues throughout most of adulthood. It shows up subtly, an extremely high tolerance for emotionally inconsistent treatment from other people, because that inconsistency simply feels emotionally normal internally instead. Many younger Gen X women stayed too long inside emotionally inconsistent relationships because emotional inconsistency itself simply felt emotionally familiar from earlier childhood years. Because the nervous system frequently normalizes anything emotionally familiar, even emotional patterns that quietly harm long-term emotional and psychological well-being throughout adulthood internally. When emotional peace finally arrived, it sometimes felt psychologically strange, almost emotionally unfamiliar, because too many years passed without peace existing internally before. Many younger Gen X women secretly admit emotional peace feels strange whenever it arrives quietly, because emotional chaos used to feel emotionally normal earlier. Sometimes peace itself can feel emotionally suspicious initially, because emotional safety simply takes longer to internalize than emotional caution did during difficult years previously. Some younger Gen X women still feel oddly uneasy whenever everything feels emotionally calm, because calmness still feels confusing when familiarity has always involved tension. This happens because emotional repetition shapes nervous system identity, not necessarily emotional logic, and nervous systems often confuse familiarity with emotional safety internally instead. So younger Gen X women sometimes felt drawn emotionally toward inconsistently available people throughout adulthood, because inconsistency itself emotionally matched earlier emotional patterns deeply internally. It was not about emotional weakness. It was about a body that simply learned to prefer familiar emotional patterns over emotionally safer unfamiliar ones. Many women from this generation also became extremely skilled at compartmentalization, separating emotional struggles internally so daily functioning would never visibly suffer outside. You survive emotionally during difficult days by setting feelings aside temporarily and processing them quietly later, often during nighttime, alone, in privacy. Compartmentalization helped many younger Gen X women survive emotionally, but it also required emotional composure that became deeply psychologically exhausting over many adult years. Many women are only now realizing how emotionally expensive their hyper-functioning lives actually were across many years of demanding emotional responsibility internally. Because they appeared strong externally for so long, others around them never realized how psychologically tired they slowly became hidden inside silent privacy daily. Many younger Gen X women became automatically responsible for things they never agreed to be emotionally responsible for inside relationships, families, workplaces, and friendships repeatedly. Now in middle age, Many women from this generation are emotionally exhausted, but still cannot fully give themselves permission to slow down completely yet. Their nervous systems are deeply protective of stability because emotional unpredictability during earlier years created lifelong sensitivity around emotional safety internally and emotional consistency. Many younger Gen X women now feel tired of explaining themselves emotionally, tired of justifying emotional limits, tired of defending their emotional capacity repeatedly to others, because over the years they carried emotional weight for partners, parents, siblings, children, friendships, workplaces, and family obligations, almost simultaneously without breaks. One of the deepest psychological truths about younger Gen X women is this: many of you learned how to function emotionally before learning how to feel. Nobody fully taught emotionally how to identify your emotional needs. You were quietly taught how to manage emotional needs others required instead repeatedly. You learned how to exist emotionally for other people long before you ever learned how to emotionally exist comfortably alongside your own inner emotional self. Which is exactly why so many younger Gen X women now in middle age finally feel emotionally tired in deeply quiet psychological ways internally. Because they were always emotionally appreciated for being reliable, but rarely emotionally appreciated for being emotionally complex, sensitive, layered, or psychologically wonderful individually. Many were emotionally praised for being capable, but few people emotionally stopped to ask how they actually felt deep inside themselves emotionally and psychologically internally. So eventually you stopped emotionally asking yourself how you felt internally too, because emotional survival required forward emotional motion at any psychological cost necessary. Now in middle age, that emotional pattern is quietly demanding to be examined, because the body simply cannot keep running on automatic emotional survival mode forever. Many younger Gen X women secretly carry a particular kind of emotional sadness, not loud emotional sadness, just quiet emotional weariness from never being chosen first. They were always emotionally dependable for everyone else, even when no one emotionally took the time to dependably show up emotionally for them in return. Many of you grew up emotionally hyper-aware of everyone else's needs, but rarely received the same emotional attention from anyone else around you in return. That emotional imbalance shaped lifelong psychological tendencies, becoming strong for everyone else while emotionally hiding personal vulnerabilities, fatigue, sensitivities, and emotional needs from others. Many younger Gen X women became emotional experts at hiding emotional fatigue, financial worry, relational pain, personal grief, and emotional disappointment publicly from others. They smiled automatically in public, answered politely automatically, and carried emotional pain quietly inside automatically without anyone ever fully understanding the cost emotionally inside. That emotional concealment may sound emotionally dramatic, but it appears extremely commonly inside the everyday lives of younger Gen X women everywhere quietly today. Many of you carried emotional responsibility from very young ages, becoming emotionally serious early, because your environment simply required emotional maturity beyond your psychological capability. You became prepared adults emotionally before you ever lived through emotionally protected childhoods, slowly creating a permanent emotional preparedness throughout adulthood internally everywhere instead. That quiet emotional preparation never disappears completely, even after years of emotional safety, because nervous systems do not forget early emotional adaptation easily ever. Many younger Gen X women secretly envy people who emotionally feel emotions openly without psychologically calculating safety, emotional cost, or emotional vulnerability publicly first, because their nervous systems learned long ago that emotional openness can carry emotional risk, especially without emotional safety, emotional trust, or emotional consistency built first. A lot of younger Gen X women carry old emotional memories of opening up emotionally and watching emotional closeness slowly disappear afterward in quietly painful ways. So emotional caution slowly became automatic, not because they emotionally lacked depth, but because emotional depth eventually required emotional protection internally during difficult emotional years afterward. Many younger Gen X women now feel emotionally exhausted because emotionally suppressing themselves carefully for decades quietly required psychological energy nobody emotionally noticed, fully understood, or fairly acknowledged. Culturally, women born between 1973 and 1980 grew up being emotionally praised whenever they suppressed difficult emotions, which subtly shaped emotional caution into everyday behavior. Because emotional self-control was rewarded everywhere socially, education systems, work environments, family relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and broader society expected emotional restraint constantly. So many younger Gen X women psychologically associated emotional suppression with maturity, professionalism, intelligence, capability, emotional safety, and successful daily adult living overall internally. Emotional regulation eventually became emotional silence, where you appeared calm outwardly, while emotionally processing significant emotional weight quietly inside daily, without expressing it externally to anyone. Over many years, that constant suppression created a long emotional backlog inside, which the body usually eventually feels physically, somatically, and chronically over time. Many women report unexpected emotional waves arriving suddenly during ordinary moments, crying quietly while driving, while folding laundry, or alone in a parked car. Those emotional waves are not random emotional outbursts. They are deeply stored emotional fatigue surfacing, because the nervous system finally feels emotionally safe enough to release. Many younger Gen X women feel emotionally tired of appearing emotionally strong publicly, because emotional strength never automatically translated into receiving emotional care from others fairly back. Many women carried emotional weight invisibly for decades while everyone simply assumed they were emotionally fine, because they appeared composed outwardly and emotionally functional publicly. The deepest emotional truth about younger Gen X women is this: many of you became emotionally self-sufficient because emotional dependence felt psychologically dangerous from very early ages. Your emotional caution is not emotional coldness, it is emotional adaptation, a learned emotional language that quietly protected you when emotional protection rarely arrived from others. Many younger Gen X women emotionally hold tension internally even while smiling, hosting meals, calmly handling workdays, and emotionally appearing socially composed outwardly to others. Small everyday moments quietly tell the bigger emotional truth: the brief sighs alone, the moments of emotional silence, the lingering emotional pauses between busy responsibilities, the calm voice on the phone while privately holding emotional exhaustion, the quiet smile while privately carrying emotional weight nobody emotionally noticed publicly. The constant emotional readiness to help others, even when your emotional energy reserves quietly remained empty internally for far too many years inside emotionally already. The deep emotional habit of remaining emotionally useful in rooms, instead of allowing yourself emotional rest, emotional softness, emotional vulnerability, or genuine emotional presence internally. Many younger Gen X women emotionally became safe places for everyone else around them, while rarely having emotionally safe places for themselves, comfortably to exist. That emotional disconnect between being emotionally needed for everyone, but rarely emotionally chosen by anyone, often forms a quietly carried lifelong sadness internally inside. Many women secretly admit feeling emotionally invisible in adulthood, not because they are ignored everywhere, but because they were rarely emotionally seen completely fully internally. They were emotionally appreciated outwardly, but rarely emotionally known deeply, which is one of the strangest, quietest emotional loneliness experiences in modern adulthood internally. Younger Gen X women psychologically still notice every emotional shift around them automatically, every emotional micro-expression, every emotional tension change inside emotionally important relationships still daily. They emotionally cannot relax in many social environments because their nervous systems automatically monitor emotional safety, constantly without anyone consciously requesting them to do so. The body sits in the chair, but mentally, emotionally, psychologically, you are still scanning for emotional safety automatically the entire evening without ever realizing. Many younger Gen X women still feel emotionally guilty for resting, taking quiet time alone, or emotionally choosing themselves over emotional responsibility for everyone else. Guilt arrives quickly even now, because emotional self-sacrifice was internalized so deeply during childhood that emotional rest still feels emotionally unfamiliar internally for many women. Childhood emotional conditioning quietly continues affecting modern adult emotional behavior, even decades later, because nervous system patterns generally do not vanish without intentional internal awareness. Many younger Gen X women become quieter under emotional stress, withdrawing instead of expressing needs, because emotional silence emotionally feels safer than emotional risk publicly to them. Many women still struggle directly asking for emotional support, even now, because asking emotionally feels emotionally unfamiliar to nervous systems trained for emotional self-reliance instead. Many emotionally hinted indirectly through expressions, sighs, body language, or carefully chosen words, hoping someone might emotionally notice their tiredness without explicitly mentioning it. When emotional support never arrived, you slowly accepted emotional self-reliance again, telling yourself emotionally that you were emotionally fine completely entirely once more inside. Many younger Gen X women still automatically deflect emotional concern from others by smiling, laughing softly, redirecting conversations, or quickly insisting they are emotionally fine instead. Many emotionally feel guilt whenever caring for themselves, sometimes hiding emotional rest from others, because they were never raised emotionally with permission to actually rest. The result: many women describe themselves as emotionally tired in ways many people simply cannot understand, almost emotionally disconnected from feeling things emotionally normally inside. Not because emotional emptiness arrives suddenly, but because emotional survival habits, once normalized for decades, often emotionally take longer to release than they originally took to form. Many younger Gen X women now in middle age feel deeply unfamiliar with emotional softness because emotional softness was rarely emotionally available to them earlier as children. Suddenly arriving emotional peace feels suspicious initially, because emotional trustworthy peace remained extremely rare during the formative early years of life inside many homes. Many emotionally describe peace as feeling temporary, almost emotionally fragile, like waiting cautiously for the next emotional disruption silently somewhere quietly arriving inside life again. Nervous systems shaped by emotional unpredictability often emotionally brace involuntarily, even when nothing actually emotionally bad is happening emotionally currently around them or inside themselves. Many younger Gen X women emotionally wait quietly for emotional change subconsciously, because change was always emotionally arriving unexpectedly during emotionally vulnerable younger years repeatedly inside. That constant emotional preparation eventually becomes psychologically exhausting in adulthood, because nervous systems were never meant to live constantly emotionally prepared all the time. Many women from this generation learned emotional practicality very early, carrying themselves carefully and emotionally responsibly, while still psychologically young and emotionally vulnerable internally instead. Many younger Gen X women now feel deeply tired carrying everything emotionally carefully because emotional survival remained psychologically exhausting for far too many years internally afterward. Many women from this generation especially notice emotional exhaustion during nighttime silence whenever ignored feelings, emotional grief, loneliness, and psychological fatigue finally begin surfacing internally. Sit with that if you want. I will sit with it too. We do not have to figure out the rest tonight.